The dust-laden wind whipped mercilessly at Madeline Nichols' face as she urged her exhausted mare forward, the animal's labored breathing matching her own desperate state. 3 weeks on the trail from St. Louis had left both horse and rider dangerously close to collapse, but the looming silhouette of Yankton, South Dakota against the setting sun, offered a faint promise of sanctuary. Her once fine traveling dress was now torn and filthy, her supplies depleted, and her spirit nearly broken by the harsh Dakota Territory wilderness. The year was 1873, and the West was still wild enough to devour unwary travelers, especially a woman journeying alone. Madeline had not planned to make this journey without company, but circumstances had forced her hand when her traveling companion had fallen ill in Omaha, leaving her with the terrible choice of continuing alone or abandoning her dream of starting anew. As she approached the outskirts of Yankton, the territorial capital, her mare stumbled. The animal's legs buckled beneath her, sending Madeline tumbling to the hard-packed dirt road. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly, her carpetbag spilling its meager contents across the dusty ground. "Whoa there!" A deep voice called out from nearby. "Are you all right, madam?" Madeline looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the orange sky. A man astride a chestnut stallion approached, his broad-shouldered frame unmistakably that of a cowboy. As he drew closer, she could make out his features' strong jawline partially hidden beneath a well-trimmed beard, kind eyes squinting with concern beneath the brim of a worn hat. Her voice cracked from thirst, and she suddenly realized just how depleted she truly was. "My horse." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, moving first to calm Madeline's mare, then kneeling beside her. "Name's Henry Garrison, madam. Ranch is just over that ridge. Your horse needs rest, and by the looks of it, so do you." "Madeline Nichols," she managed, attempting to stand before her injured ankle gave way. Henry caught her before she hit the ground again. "Easy now. You're exhausted from traveling alone, aren't you?" His voice was gentle but direct. "That ankle needs tending, and night's coming fast. My ranch is the nearest shelter for miles." He gathered her scattered belongings with efficient movements. "Rest there as long as you need." The kindness in his eyes made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. After weeks of facing hardship alone, the simple offer of sanctuary nearly broke the careful composure she'd maintained throughout her journey. "I wouldn't want to impose," she said, her proper Eastern upbringing asserting itself even in her desperate state. Henry's laugh was warm and without mockery. "Madam, out here an open door isn't an imposition, it's survival. Now can you ride?" When she nodded, he helped her mount his own horse, then gathered the reins of her exhausted mare. As they made their slow way toward the promised ranch, Madeline fought to stay conscious, the gentle sway of the horse and her own exhaustion conspiring to pull her toward darkness. Henry's voice drifted to her ears. "Stay with me, Miss Nichols, just a little further." The ranch house that emerged from the growing darkness was modest but well built, with a broad porch and sturdy outbuildings. A weathered sign reading Garrison Ranch hung above the gate. As they approached, a young boy of perhaps 16 rushed from the barn. "Mr. Garrison." "You're late for—" The boy stopped short at the sight of Madeline. "Who's she?" "Found her on the South Road, Thomas. Horse gave out. Help me get her inside, then tend to both animals." What followed was a blur of movement as Madeline was carefully helped from the horse and into the warmth of the ranch house. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of something savory hung in the air. An older woman with silver-streaked hair gasped when they entered. "Lord above, Henry." "What have you found now?" "A traveler in need, Mrs. Holloway. Could you fetch water and bandages?" Her ankles twisted. Madeline found herself gently deposited in a chair near the fire, her damaged ankle carefully elevated on a footstool. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway," clucked with concern as she examined the swollen joint. "Traveling alone, were you?" she asked, her tone somewhere between disapproval and admiration. "That's a dangerous business for anyone, let alone a lady." "I had little choice," Madeline replied, wincing as the woman's capable hands wrapped her ankle. Henry returned with a cup of water, which Madeline accepted gratefully. "Mrs. Holloway keeps this place running," he explained. "I'd be lost without her wisdom and cooking." The older woman snorted good-naturedly. "And don't you forget it. Now Miss Nichols needs food and rest. I've made up the spare room." Henry nodded. "Rest here as long as you need, Miss Nichols. Yankton will still be there when you're mended." "How did you know I was heading to Yankton?" Madeline asked, suddenly suspicious. Henry smiled. "Where else would a proper lady like yourself be heading in these parts? It's the only civilization for miles." After a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Madeline found herself installed in a clean, modest bedroom. The bed, with its handmade quilt and fresh linens, looked like heaven after weeks of sleeping rough on the trail. As Mrs. Holloway helped her prepare for bed, Madeline's natural caution reasserted itself. "Mr. Garrison seems a kind man, but I don't wish to abuse his hospitality. I should continue to Yankton tomorrow." The housekeeper gave her a measuring look. "That ankle says otherwise, miss. Besides, Henry Garrison is the most honorable man in Dakota territory, fought for the Union, built this ranch from nothing, and never turned away anyone in need." She paused. "Lost his wife and baby daughter to fever 5 years back. Since then, it's just been him, me, and the ranch hands." The simple statement contained volumes, and Madeline felt a twist of sympathy for the cowboy whose eyes, she now realized, carried shadows of past pain despite their kindness. "Rest now," Mrs. Holloway said, placing a pitcher of water on the bedside table. "Morning comes early on a ranch." Sleep claimed Madeline almost instantly, her body surrendering to exhaustion the moment her head touched the pillow. For the first time in weeks, she slept without one eye open, feeling inexplicably safe under the roof of a stranger who had offered shelter without question. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the distant sounds of ranch life already in full swing. Madeline's ankle throbbed dully as she tested her weight on it, but the swelling had subsided somewhat. She found a simple cotton dress laid out for her, clearly belonging to Mrs. Holloway, but altered hastily to better fit her slighter frame. When she emerged from her room, dressed and with her hair neatly braided, she found the housekeeper busy in the kitchen. "There you are. Thought you might sleep through to dinner." The woman smiled warmly. "How's that ankle?" "Better, thank you. I appreciate the loan of the dress, Mrs. Holloway waved away her thanks. "Can't have you wearing that travel-worn thing. It needs a good washing." She gestured to the table. "Sit and eat. Henry's been out since dawn, but he asked after you before he left." The breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits was the best meal Madeline had enjoyed in months. As she ate, she shared carefully edited details of her journey from St. Louis. She omitted the true reason for her flight westward, the scandal that had forced her to abandon her teaching position, and the man whose unwanted attentions had turned to threats when rejected. "I've secured a position at the territorial school in Yankton," she explained. "Term starts in 2 weeks. A school teacher. That explains your fine speaking manner." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "Yankton needs educated folks, town's growing fast since becoming the territorial capital." After breakfast, despite Mrs. Holloway's protests, Madeline insisted on helping with household chores. Her ankle limited her mobility, but she could still sit at the table to shell peas and knead dough. The simple, domestic tasks were soothing after the constant tension of travel. It was nearly noon when the door swung open and Henry entered, bringing with him the sense of sunshine, leather, and honest work. He stopped short at the sight of Madeline at his kitchen table, almost as if he'd forgotten her presence in his home. "Miss Nichols, you're looking considerably improved." His smile transformed his weather-beaten face, softening the lines around his eyes. "Thanks to your hospitality, Mr. Garrison, I'm grateful for your kindness to a stranger." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with hints of copper in the sunlight. "No strangers out here, just folks who haven't shared a meal yet." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "How's the ankle?" "Healing, though I fear I won't be able to continue to Yankton for at least another day or two." Henry nodded. "No rush. Your mare needs rest too. She was badly dehydrated. Thomas is taking good care of her." Mrs. Holloway placed a plate before Henry. "Miss Nichols tells me she's to be the new schoolteacher in Yankton. Isn't that something? A noble profession." Henry's eyes held new respect as he regarded her. "My late wife was a teacher before we married. Always said educating young minds was the most important work there was." Madeline felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the sunlight streaming through the window. "I believe that too. Every child deserves the chance that education provides, regardless of circumstances." The conversation flowed easily through the meal, and Madeline found herself genuinely enjoying Henry's company. Unlike many men she'd encountered, he listened when she spoke and considered her words thoughtfully. After lunch, Henry surprised her by carrying a comfortable chair onto the front porch. "Thought you might like some fresh air. Being cooped up inside can make the healing seem slower." The gesture touched her deeply. As she settled into the chair, a quilt tucked around her legs against the spring breeze, she watched Henry return to work directing ranch hands, checking fences, moving with the easy confidence of a man at home in his environment. The afternoon passed pleasantly as Madeline observed ranch life unfold before her. Several times, Henry paused in his work to check on her, bringing water or simply exchanging a few words. Each time, she found herself looking forward to his return. By evening, when they gathered for dinner, Madeline realized with some surprise that she felt more at ease in this rustic ranch house than she had in her proper St. Louis boarding house. The simple rhythms of ranch life, the honest work, and the straightforward kindness of her hosts created an atmosphere of peace she hadn't experienced in years. After dinner, Henry surprised her by producing a chessboard. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you enjoy reading. Thought you might appreciate something to occupy your mind while your body heals." The carefully carved wooden pieces were obviously handmade, some showing signs of repair. "These are beautiful," Madeline said, running her fingers over a knight's detailed features. "My father taught me to carve them, made this set during my first winter on this land." He arranged the pieces with practiced hands. "Do you play?" "My father taught me as well." She smiled at the coincidence. He believed a strategic mind was important for both sons and daughters. The game that followed revealed much about Henry. He played thoughtfully but not cautiously, taking calculated risks and accepting defeats with good grace when his gambits failed. They were evenly matched, and the game stretched long into the evening, their conversation ranging from books to philosophy to the challenges of territorial politics. "Your father sounds like a forward-thinking man," Henry remarked as he contemplated his next move. He was. He believed women deserved education equal to men's. It wasn't a popular position in Virginia society. She moved her bishop. "He died in '65 just after the war ended, pneumonia." "I'm sorry." Henry's sympathy was genuine. The war took too many good men one way or another. Madeline studied him. Mrs. Holloway mentioned you fought for the Union. He nodded, his expression growing distant. Illinois 83rd Infantry. Spent 3 years wondering if I'd live to see home again. He moved his knight, capturing her pawn. When I returned, I found I couldn't settle back into farm life. The war changed everything, so I came west in '67 looking for open skies and a fresh start, and found this land. This land found me, I think. His smile returned. Felt right the moment I saw it. Built the house that first year, married Caroline the next. Had 5 good years before the fever took her and our Elizabeth. The simple statement held such profound loss that Madeline's heart ached for him. I can't imagine such grief. It nearly broke me, he admitted quietly, but this land doesn't permit wallowing. There are always cattle to tend, crops to plant, work that demands doing no matter how heavy your heart. He studied the chessboard. Check, I believe. She refocused on the game, finding her king indeed threatened. As she considered her options, she felt a new respect for this man who had suffered yet continued building something worthwhile. The game ended in a draw, both players recognizing the stalemate simultaneously. As Henry carefully packed away the pieces, Madeline found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you for the game," she said. "It's been too long since I had a worthy opponent. The pleasure was mine." He offered his arm to help her rise. "Perhaps we can have a rematch tomorrow." The question contained more than a simple invitation to play chess, and they both knew it. Madeline found herself nodding. "I'd like that very much." That night, lying in the comfortable bed, Madeline confronted the unexpected turn her journey had taken. She had planned everything so carefully: the escape from St. Louis, the teaching position secured through correspondence, the fresh start in a place where no one knew her past. Nowhere in those plans had she accounted for the possibility of meeting someone like Henry Garrison, or the way his quiet strength and kindness might affect her carefully guarded heart. "It's merely gratitude," she whispered to herself in the darkness, "and perhaps loneliness, nothing more." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. Each morning, Madeline would awaken to the sounds of ranch life, join the household for breakfast, and then find ways to make herself useful despite her injury. Her ankle improved steadily, allowing her to move about with less pain, though Mrs. Holloway insisted she continue to rest it as much as possible. Henry, for his part, seemed to find more reasons to remain close to the house. Tasks that might normally have taken him far afield were delegated to ranch hands, while he focused on repairs to the barn roof and corral fencing work that kept him within sight of the porch where Madeline often sat. Their chess games continued each evening, sometimes accompanied by Henry reading aloud from one of the books in his modest library. Madeline was surprised to discover his collection included not just practical manuals on ranching and medicine, but also volumes of poetry, history, and even a few novels. "Caroline's influence," he explained when she commented on the diverse selection. She believed strongly that life on the frontier didn't mean abandoning culture or education. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. His expression grew thoughtful rather than pained. "I think you would have liked each other." The simple statement touched Madeline deeply. That he could imagine her friendship with his late wife suggested he saw her as more than just a passing traveler in need. On the 4th day, Madeline's mare had recovered enough strength for light exercise. Henry suggested a short ride around the ranch property, both to exercise the horse and to give Madeline a proper view of the land. "Are you certain my ankle is ready?" she asked, though she longed to escape the confines of the house, however pleasant they had become. "We'll take it slow," he promised, "and I'll be right beside you." The spring air was crisp and invigorating as they set out, Madeline's mare moving carefully beneath her as if sensing her rider's injury. Henry rode his chestnut stallion alongside, pointing out boundaries and features of his property with evident pride. The creek there provides water year-round, even in the driest summers, and that rise to the north shelters the house from the worst winter winds. He gestured toward distant hills. "I hold grazing rights to those highlands, two best summer pasture in the county." Madeline could see why he loved this land. The rolling prairie stretched in all directions, dotted with wildflowers and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. The vastness might have seemed intimidating, but instead felt like freedom after the close confines of city life. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "You've built something remarkable here." His expression softened. "Thank you. Sometimes I need an outsider's eyes to remind me how far we've come." When I first arrived, there was nothing but prairie grass and a half-collapsed trapper's cabin. They rode to a small rise overlooking a bend in the creek, where Henry suggested they rest. He spread a blanket on the ground and helped Madeline dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she found herself momentarily flustered. As they sat watching the horses graze nearby, Henry asked the question she had been dreading. "What really brings you to Dakota territory, Madeline?" "Teaching is a noble calling, but there are schools much closer to St. Louis that would welcome an educated woman." She stiffened slightly. "The position in Yankton offered better terms." "Perhaps." His tone was gentle but persistent. "Or perhaps you're running from something." Madeline looked away, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. The silence stretched between them until finally she spoke. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone familiar with the signs." He plucked a stem of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "Most folks don't cross half a continent alone unless they're leaving something behind." The compassion in his voice loosened something inside her. The story she had kept carefully contained spilled out her position as a teacher in a prestigious St. Louis girls' school, the unwanted attentions from the married headmaster, her rejection of his advances, and his subsequent campaign to undermine her reputation and position. When he threatened to ruin me completely if I continued to refuse him, I realized I had to leave. His influence in St. Louis society was too great. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt. "I wrote to every territorial school seeking a position far enough away that his reach couldn't follow." Henry's expression had darkened as she spoke. "Some men don't deserve the name," he said, his voice tight with anger on her behalf. "You showed courage, leaving everything familiar to protect your dignity and future." His understanding, free from judgment, brought tears to her eyes. "I sometimes wonder if I was merely a coward for not standing my ground. There's no courage in martyrdom when the battle is rigged against you." He reached out hesitantly, covering her hand with his own. "Starting fresh isn't cowardice, it's wisdom." The warmth of his hand on hers felt like an anchor in the uncertain seas of her life. Neither spoke for several minutes, content in the shared understanding that had grown between them. Finally, Henry broke the silence. "Yankton is a good town, growing fast. The school board is headed by Judge Williams, a fair man who values education highly. You'll be respected there." Madeline nodded, suddenly uncertain. The future that had seemed so clear when she left St. Louis now appeared more complex. "I should be able to travel within a day or two." "My ankle is much improved." Something like disappointment flashed across Henry's face before he masked it with a polite smile. "Of course. Your position awaits, and I'm sure you're eager to settle before the school term begins." The ride back to the ranch was quieter. both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, however, they noticed unusual activity. A wagon was parked in the yard, and several men stood talking with Mrs. Holloway on the porch. Henry frowned. "That's Sheriff Pearson's wagon. Something must have happened in town." As they rode closer, Mrs. Holloway spotted them and waved urgently. "Henry, thank goodness you're back. The sheriff's brought news." They dismounted quickly, Henry automatically offering support as Madeline balanced on her healing ankle. Sheriff Pearson, a weathered man with a salt and pepper mustache, nodded grimly in greeting. "Garrison, madam." He removed his hat. "Afraid I bring troubling news. There's been violence on the stage road to Yankton. Sioux warriors hit a passenger coach yesterday, 3 dead, including the driver." Madeline's blood ran cold. "The stage road? But that's the same route you'd have taken if your horse hadn't given out," Henry finished, his face grim. "Was it a large party, Sheriff? Reports say 6 or 7 warriors." "Army's sending a detachment from Fort Randall, but until they arrive, the territorial governors advised against travel, especially for women and children." The sheriff glanced at Madeline. "Mrs. Holloway says you're bound for Yankton, miss." "Yes, I'm to be the new school teacher." "Well, madam, I'd strongly recommend delaying your journey at least a week or 2. These flare-ups usually settle once the Army makes a show of force." Madeline felt a complex mix of emotions: fear at the narrow escape she'd unknowingly had, concern about her position in Yankton, and most confusingly, a sense of relief that her departure from the ranch would be delayed. Henry's steady voice broke through her thoughts. "Miss Nichols will remain here until it's safe to travel. Sheriff, do you know if the mail coach is still running? Military escort only, and limited passenger service." "Good. I'll need to send a letter to Judge Williams in Yankton explaining Miss Nichols' delayed arrival." Henry turned to Madeline. "If you'll write a note, I'll make sure it reaches the school board." The thoughtfulness of this gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you." After the sheriff departed, having accepted Mrs. Holloway's invitation to stay for dinner, Madeline retreated to her room to compose her letter to the school board. As she wrote, explaining the circumstances of her delay, she found herself struggling with conflicted feelings. The attack on the stagecoach was tragic, and the thought that she might have been among the victims if not for her horse's collapse was sobering. Yet she couldn't deny that the enforced extension of her stay at Garrison Ranch brought a sense of reprieve: more time in this peaceful place, more evenings of chess and conversation with Henry. "This is madness," she whispered to herself. "I have a position waiting, a new life planned. I cannot allow myself to become attached." But even as she formed the thought, she knew it might already be too late. Dinner that evening was subdued, with Sheriff Pearson sharing what details he knew of the attack. The Sioux who had struck the stagecoach were believed to be a small breakaway group, angry over recent treaty violations by white settlers. The sheriff took pains to emphasize that most of the Sioux Nation remained at peace. "It's a complicated situation," he explained. "The government promises land and provisions, then settlers encroach, provisions don't arrive and tensions rise. I'm not excusing the violence, mind you, but there's blame enough to go around." Henry nodded grimly. "I've traded with the Sioux for years. Most want peace, but peace requires good faith on both sides." As the meal concluded, the sheriff prepared to return to town. "The letter for Judge Williams, have it ready by noon tomorrow. I'll see it goes out with the military mail." After he departed, an awkward silence fell over the household. The news had cast a shadow over their previously comfortable routine, reminding them all of the precarious nature of frontier life. That night, there was no chess game. Henry excused himself to check the perimeter of his property, taking 2 ranch hands with him. Though he assured Madeline there was little risk of attack on an established ranch, the precaution spoke volumes. Unable to sleep, Madeline sat by the window in her room, watching the moonlight spill across the silent prairie. The day's events had thrown her carefully laid plans into disarray, but more disruptive still were the feelings taking root in her heart. In Henry Garrison, she had found something unexpected, a man whose strength was matched by gentleness, whose intelligence was paired with humility, whose past sorrows had deepened rather than hardened him. The thought of leaving for Yankton, of perhaps never seeing him again after these brief days, brought an ache she hadn't anticipated. "It's foolishness," she told her reflection in the window glass. "The gratitude of a rescued traveler, nothing more." But the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Morning brought clear skies and a return to ranch routines. Though Henry assigned ranch hands to keep watch and shifts, a subtle reminder of the danger that lingered beyond the property boundaries. Madeline finished her letter to the school board, explaining her delayed arrival and expressing her continued enthusiasm for the position. When she gave it to Henry to include with his own correspondence, their fingers brushed momentarily. The brief contact sent a now familiar warmth through her, and she found herself unable to meet his gaze directly. "Thank you for arranging this," she said. "I would hate for them to think I had abandoned the position." "Of course." His voice was carefully neutral. "I'm sure they'll understand the circumstances." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words, until Mrs. Holloway's arrival in the kitchen broke the tension. The next several days settled into a new rhythm. Madeline's ankle healed completely, allowing her to take on more substantial responsibilities around the ranch. She discovered she enjoyed the physical work of gathering eggs, helping in the garden, and even assisting with minor repairs to tack and equipment. Henry seemed to find more reasons to remain close to the house, and their conversations grew deeper, more personal. He shared stories of his childhood in Illinois, his experiences during the war, and his dreams for the ranch's future. In turn, Madeline spoke of her Virginia upbringing, her passion for teaching, and her hopes of someday opening a school of her own. Each evening brought renewed closeness, whether through chess games, shared reading, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. The attraction between them grew more evident, though neither acknowledged it directly. A week after the sheriff's visit, Henry proposed a picnic to celebrate Madeline's complete recovery. "There's a spot by the creek I'd like to show you, a proper wildflower meadow this time of year." The day dawned perfect for their excursion, sunshine tempered by a gentle breeze, the prairie alive with birdsong. Mrs. Holloway packed a substantial basket, adding a knowing smile that made Madeline blush despite her efforts at composure. The ride to the meadow was leisurely, their horses moving side by side through stands of cottonwood and along the winding creek. When they reached their destination, Madeline gasped in delight. The meadow was indeed carpeted with wildflowers, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and dozens of varieties she couldn't name, creating a riot of color against the green grass. "It's like something from a painting," she breathed, drinking in the beauty before her. Henry smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I found this place my first spring here, thought I'd stumbled into some kind of dream." He dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They spread the blanket beneath the shade of a massive cottonwood, the creek burbling peacefully nearby. The meal Mrs. Holloway had prepared was simple but delicious: cold fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and apple pie still warm from the oven. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, touching on books they both loved, childhood memories, and hopes for the future. When the meal was finished, Henry leaned back against the tree trunk, his expression growing more serious. "Have you given thought to what happens after Yankton?" he asked. "Once you've fulfilled your teaching contract," the question caught Madeline off guard. "I suppose I haven't looked that far ahead. The position is for 2 years initially." Henry nodded, absently running his fingers through the grass beside the blanket. 2 years is both a long time and no time at all out here." "What do you mean?" "The frontier changes rapidly. Towns that were just a few buildings 1 year become proper cities the next. People arrive, leave, marry, die." He glanced at her. 2 years from now, you might find Yankton has grown too civilized for your liking, or perhaps too wild still." Madeline studied him, sensing the conversation had layers she couldn't fully grasp. "Are you suggesting I might not stay in Yankton after my contract?" "I'm suggesting that the future holds more possibilities than we sometimes allow ourselves to see." His gaze held her steadily. "When I came west, I had one vision: build a ranch, work the land, perhaps grow old alone among my cattle. I never imagined." He trailed off, but the unspoken conclusion hung in the air between them. Madeline's heart quickened, but uncertainty held her silent. Henry seemed to gather himself, changing direction. "What I mean to say is, life here teaches flexibility. Plans change, opportunities arise, paths cross unexpectedly." "Like a horse collapsing on the road to Yankton," Madeline offered softly. "Exactly." His smile returned, warming his eyes. "The unexpected can be a blessing if we're open to it." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Madeline found herself wishing he would simply speak plainly about his feelings, even as she recognized her own hesitation to do the same. A distant rumble of thunder broke the spell. Henry glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering with surprising speed. "Spring storms move fast on the prairie," he said, rising quickly. "We should head back before it hits." They packed the remains of their picnic hastily and mounted their horses. The wind had already picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain. As they rode, the sky darkened ominously, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall when they were still 20 minutes from the ranch. "There's a line shack ahead," Henry called over the rising wind. "We can wait it out there." The small wooden structure appeared just as the skies opened fully. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses into the attached lean-to before hurrying inside. The shack was simple: 1 room with a small stove, a narrow cot, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs. Henry moved efficiently, lighting a lamp against the growing darkness and starting a small fire in the stove. "Ranch hands use this during calving season or when checking the far pastures," he explained, hanging their wet hats on pegs by the door. "It's basic, but dry." Madeline stood awkwardly, water dripping from her riding skirt onto the plank floor. Outside, the storm raged in earnest, rain lashing against the small windows and thunder booming overhead. "Your dress is soaked through," Henry observed with concern. "There are spare clothes in that trunk." "They'll be too large, but dry at least." He turned his back discreetly while she changed into a flannel shirt and trousers that indeed swallowed her smaller frame. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, securing the waistband with a length of rope. "You can look now," she said, feeling strangely vulnerable despite being more fully covered than before. When Henry turned, something in his expression made her breath catch. He looked at her not with amusement at her unusual attire, but with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire now crackling in the stove. "I've never seen a woman in trousers before," he said, his voice slightly rough. "It's surprisingly becoming." Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. To cover her confusion, She hung her wet dress near the stove and moved to the small window, watching the rain create rivulets down the glass. "How long do these storms typically last?" Henry came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Hard to say. Sometimes an hour, sometimes half the day." The small space seemed to shrink further with his proximity. Madeline was acutely aware of him, the clean scent of his skin beneath the damp wool of his shirt, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size. Madeline. The way he said her name made her turn to face him. His expression was serious, his eyes searching hers. "I need to say something, and I'd appreciate your hearing me out completely before you respond." Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Of course." Henry took a deep breath. "These past 2 weeks, having you at the ranch, sharing conversations and meals and quiet evenings, it's awakened something in me I thought had died with Caroline." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I know you have plans, the teaching position, your fresh start in Yankton. I respect that, and I would never ask you to abandon your dreams, but I find myself wondering if there might be room in those dreams for additional possibilities." Madeline stood very still, hardly daring to breathe as he continued. "I'm not a wealthy man, but the ranch is prosperous and growing. I can offer a good life, honest work, and a home that might someday include a small school of your own if that's what you desire." His voice grew softer. "Most of all, I can offer my heart, which I find has somehow healed enough to love again." The declaration hung in the air between them, sincere and unadorned. Outside, thunder rumbled and rain continued to pour, but within the small shack, time seemed suspended. When Madeline didn't immediately respond, uncertainty crept into Henry's expression. "I understand this is sudden and perhaps unwelcome. If you prefer, we needn't speak of it again." "No," the word burst from her with unexpected force. "I mean, it's not unwelcome." Hope flared in his eyes, but he remained cautious. "No." Madeline struggled to organize her thoughts, to articulate the confusion of emotions his words had unleashed. "These past 2 weeks have been unlike anything I've experienced. The ranch, the work, the rhythm of life here, it feels right in a way I never anticipated." She took a steadying breath. "And you, your kindness, your strength, your quiet wisdom, they've touched me deeply." "But," he prompted gently, sensing her hesitation, "but I've only just begun to stand on my own. I left St. Louis to escape one man's control, to build a life defined by my own choices." She looked down at her hands. "I fear losing myself again, becoming merely an extension of someone else's life rather than the architect of my own." Understanding dawned in Henry's eyes. "Madeline, the last thing I want is to clip your wings just as you've learned to fly." He reached for her hand, holding it gently between his own. "What I'm offering isn't a cage, but a partnership. Your dreams matter to me, whether that's teaching, running a school, or something else entirely." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. "I believe you mean that now, but not just now. Always." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "My father taught me that a marriage should lift both people higher, not diminish either. Caroline and I shared that belief, and it guided our life together." The mention of his late wife brought a new concern to Madeline's mind. "I would never want to replace her in your heart." Henry's expression softened. "You wouldn't be replacing anyone. The heart doesn't work that way. It expands." He placed her hand over his chest, where she could feel the strong, steady beat beneath her palm. "Caroline will always be part of who I am, but that doesn't diminish what I feel for you, something new and different, but equally profound." Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up within her. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tumult in her heart, powerful, transformative. cleansing. "I don't need an answer today," Henry continued gently. "The teaching position in Yankton is still yours if you want it. All I ask is that you consider the possibility of a future that includes both your ambitions and us." The simple word "us" resonated through Madeline with surprising force. For years, she had defined herself as singular, independent, alone by necessity if not by choice. The prospect of becoming part of an us was both terrifying and tantalizingly beautiful. "I need time," she whispered. "Time you shall have." He released her hand slowly, reluctantly. "Whatever you decide, know that my respect and admiration for you won't change." The storm continued around them, but the atmosphere within the small shack had shifted. Though uncertainty remained, something new had been acknowledged, a connection too significant to ignore, too precious to rush. They spent the next hour in quieter conversation, speaking of practical matters, the ranch's operations, the progress of Henry's cattle herd, Madeline's plans for her first term of teaching. The ordinary topics provided a necessary respite from the emotional intensity of their earlier discussion. When the rain finally slackened, they prepared to return to the ranch. As Madeline changed back into her now dry dress, she found herself examining the small shack with new eyes, seeing not just a functional shelter, but a place that might forever mark a turning point in her life. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the storm-washed prairie gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight. Neither spoke much, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Yet there was a comfortable quality to the silence, the quiet of two people who no longer needed constant words to communicate. Mrs. Holloway greeted them with relief, fussing over their rain-dampened state and insisting on hot baths and dry clothes before dinner. If she noticed the subtle change in the air between them, she gave no indication beyond a particularly searching look as she handed Madeline a steaming cup of tea. That evening, their customary chess game carried an underlying current of awareness. Each move, each brief touch as pieces were captured, each shared glance held new meaning. When Henry's fingers brushed hers as she handed him her defeated king, the contact sent a jolt of recognition through her. This was no mere attraction, but something far deeper and more consequential. Later, alone in her room, Madeline found herself at the window once more, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Henry's proposal had upended her carefully constructed plans, offering an alternative future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. The teaching position in Yankton had represented security, independence, a fresh start far from scandal and unwanted attention. But she had to acknowledge that it had also represented solitude, meals eaten alone, evenings spent in quiet lodgings, holidays marked without family or close friends. What Henry offered was different, a life of shared purpose, mutual support, the chance to teach while also belonging to something larger than herself. A family, perhaps, someday. Children who would grow up knowing both books and open skies, classrooms and cattle drives. It needn't be either or, she whispered to herself, the realization dawning slowly. Perhaps it can be both. The thought accompanied her into sleep, bringing dreams of possibilities she'd never before dared to entertain. Morning arrived with word from Yankton, a rider bringing news that the Army detachment had arrived. The Indian unrest had subsided, and the roads were considered safe for travel once more. Along with this information came a letter from Judge Williams, responding to her delayed arrival with understanding and confirming that the teaching position remained hers if she could arrive within the week. The news should have brought relief, but instead, Madeline felt her heart sink. The deadline forced a decision she wasn't yet ready to make. Henry received the information with careful neutrality, though she detected disappointment beneath his composed expression. I can have Thomas prepare the wagon for tomorrow morning if you wish to depart then. Yes, I suppose that would be best. The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. The day passed in preparations for her departure, laundering her travel clothes, packing her few possessions, ensuring provisions for the journey. Throughout it all, Madeline felt increasingly torn, the weight of the impending decision growing heavier with each hour that passed. By evening, a tense silence had fallen over the household. Mrs. Holloway busied herself preparing a special farewell dinner, while Henry spent most of the afternoon with his cattle, returning only as the sun began to set. They ate with little conversation, the unspoken hovering between them like a physical presence. After the meal, Henry surprised her by asking if she would join him for a walk. "One last sunset on the ranch," he said, his tone carefully light. "A proper farewell." The evening was perfect, warm with the promise of summer. The prairie bathed in golden light as the sun descended toward the horizon. They walked in silence until they reached a small rise overlooking the ranch house and outbuildings. The scene below was peaceful, smoke rising from the chimney, cattle in the near pasture, ranch hands moving about their evening chores. "I've always loved this view," Henry said quietly. "From here, you can see everything that matters." Madeline followed his gaze, taking in the ranch not just the buildings and animals but the life they represented. A life built with determination and vision, sustained through hardship and loss, now thriving under Henry's careful stewardship. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "It could be your home too." The words were soft, almost as if he hadn't intended to speak them aloud. Madeline turned to face him fully. "Henry, he shook his head gently. "I promised you time and I've given you precious little. It's unfair to press you now on the eve of your departure." "But tomorrow I must choose," she said, giving voice to the dilemma that had consumed her thoughts. "Yes." His expression was solemn. "And I want you to know that whatever you decide, I will respect your choice. If you go to Yankton to fulfill your teaching contract, I will understand. The position represents everything you've worked toward." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This, she realized, was what set him apart from other men she had known: his genuine respect for her aspirations, his willingness to place her needs alongside his own. What if? She hesitated, then gathered her courage. What if there were a way to honor both commitments, the teaching position and what's between us? Hope flickered in Henry's eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "Yankton is only a day's ride from here. If I took the position, fulfilled my obligation to the school." She took a deep breath. "We could court properly, learn more about each other, see if what we feel now can grow into something lasting." The tension in Henry's shoulders eased visibly. "You mean you'd come back on weekends, holidays?" "If I were welcome." "Welcome," he laughed softly, the sound warm with relief and joy. "Madeline, you would always be welcome. The ranch would be counting the days until your return each time. And after the school term ends for the summer," his smile deepened. "I imagine a certain schoolteacher might appreciate a peaceful place to rest and rejuvenate." "And after the 2-year contract?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry's expression grew serious once more. "After 2 years, I hope you'll know with certainty whether your heart belongs here with me. If it does, nothing would make me happier than to make you my wife. If it doesn't..." He swallowed hard. "Then I'll be grateful for whatever time we've shared and wish you well on whatever path you choose." The generosity of this response, the absence of pressure or manipulation, confirmed what Madeline already knew in her heart. This man was unlike any she had encountered before, offering not possession but partnership, not control but support. "I think," she said carefully, "that my heart already knows its home, but my mind needs the reassurance of time." Then time you shall have." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet grounding. "May I write to you in Yankton? I would be disappointed if you didn't." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Henry drew her closer. "Madeline Nichols, you arrived at my door exhausted from traveling alone. I told you to rest here as long as you needed. I never imagined you might rest your heart here permanently." "Nor did I," she admitted. "But sometimes the journey leads us to unexpected destinations." In the gathering twilight, with the first stars appearing overhead, Henry lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that held both promise and patience, the meeting of two souls who had found in each other something rare and precious, worth the careful nurturing that time would bring. The following morning dawned clear and bright. Madeline's departure for Yankton proceeded as planned, but the air of finality had been replaced by a sense of beginning. Henry himself drove the wagon, with Thomas riding alongside as additional protection, though the roads were reported safe. The journey passed quickly, filled with conversation about practical arrangements, the best route between Yankton and the ranch, which weekends Madeline might be able to visit, plans for letters in between. What might have been a farewell became instead the first steps in building a shared future. As they approached Yankton, the territorial capital revealed itself a growing town with proper streets, substantial buildings, and the bustle of commerce. The schoolhouse, when they reached it, was a well-constructed building near the center of town, with large windows and a small bell tower. Judge Williams received them warmly, expressing relief at Madeline's safe arrival and approval of Henry's protective escort. The living arrangements proved better than expected, a small but comfortable apartment attached to the schoolhouse itself, with a private entrance and a small garden. When the time came for Henry to depart, their goodbye was touched with sadness, but undergirded by certainty. This was not an ending but a pause, a necessary separation that would make their eventual reunion all the sweeter. "The first school holiday is in 3 weeks, Madeline reminded him as they stood beside the wagon. "I'll arrive Friday evening. I'll meet you at the crossroads," he promised, his eyes conveying what propriety prevented him from expressing more directly in the public street. As his wagon disappeared down the dusty road, Madeline felt not despair but anticipation. She turned toward the schoolhouse, her workplace, her temporary home, with a sense of purpose. The coming weeks would be busy with lesson plans, meeting students and parents, establishing herself in the community. And on her desk, already, lay a sheet of paper with the beginnings of her first letter to Henry. The weeks that followed unfolded according to their plan. Madeline threw herself into her teaching duties, quickly earning the respect of both students and parents with her thorough knowledge and genuine care. Her letters to Henry detailed her daily experiences, the challenges and triumphs of frontier education, and her growing affection for Yankton despite its limitations. His replies, arriving faithfully each week, brought news of the ranch calving progress, fence repairs, the vegetable garden misses. Holloway had expanded in anticipation of a more permanent female presence. Between the lines of practical information ran a current of deepening emotion, each letter building the bridge between them. True to his word, Henry met her at the crossroads for her first visit back to the ranch. The reunion was joyful, both of them discovering that absence had indeed strengthened rather than diminished their connection. Mrs. Holloway welcomed her as if she had been gone a year rather than 3 weeks, and even Thomas seemed pleased by her return. That weekend established a pattern that would continue through the school term, Madeline teaching in Yankton during the week, returning to the ranch whenever her duties permitted. With each visit, the ranch felt more like home, and Henry's presence in her life more essential. By the time summer arrived and the school term ended, the courtship that had begun in letters and weekend visits had blossomed into love too deep to question. When Henry proposed properly, on a summer evening beneath the same cottonwood where they had shared their picnic months before, Madeline's acceptance came without hesitation. They were married in August, with Judge Williams officiating and the entire community ranch hands, Yankton residents, neighboring farmers, and even a delegation from the nearby Sioux settlement with whom Henry had maintained peaceful relations gathering to celebrate. Mrs. Holloway wept openly, declaring it the happiest day since her own wedding 40 years earlier. Their life together unfolded with the natural rhythm of the seasons. Madeline fulfilled her 2-year contract with the Yankton school, the daily separation made bearable by the knowledge that it was temporary. In her 2nd year, with Henry's enthusiastic support, she began holding classes for ranch children and those from neighboring properties 2 evenings a week. By the time her contract ended, the small school at Garrison Ranch had grown enough to justify her full attention. The Territorial Education Board, impressed by her results, officially recognized it as a satellite school, providing modest funding for books and materials. Their family grew as well. Their first child, a son they named William after Henry's father, arrived in the spring of 1876, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth Caroline, named for Henry's first child and wife, a choice Madeline had suggested, understanding that honoring the past strengthened rather than threatened their present happiness. As the years passed, Garrison Ranch prospered, expanding its operations and weathering the inevitable challenges of frontier life: drought years, harsh winters, economic downturns. Through it all, the foundation laid during those first tentative weeks of acquaintance, mutual respect, shared values, genuine partnership sustained them. On the 10th anniversary of Madeline's arrival at the ranch, Henry presented her with a gift, a beautifully bound journal with a hand-carved wooden cover. Inside, he had pasted the letter she had written him during their first separation, when she had traveled to Yankton to begin teaching. "I kept every one," he told her, showing her a box containing a decade of correspondence. "Even after you were here permanently, I couldn't bear to part with them." Madeline traced the familiar handwriting, now faded with time. "I was so uncertain then," she mused. "Afraid to trust what my heart already knew." Henry's smile held the wisdom of years shared. "And yet here we are, exactly where we were meant to be." That night, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, the ranch peaceful around them in the golden evening light, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The desperate flight from St. Louis, the exhausting trek across the prairie, the collapse of her horse that had seemed at the time a disaster. "You ever wonder," she asked Henry, "what would have happened if I had reached Yankton without incident that day? If we had never met?" He considered the question seriously, as he did all her thoughts. "I believe some things are meant to be, though not without our choosing them." He took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after a decade of marriage. "You were exhausted from traveling alone. I offered rest for as long as you needed. That you chose to rest your heart here permanently was the greatest gift of my life." Madeline leaned against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that her journey had led her home, not to a place, but to the person with whom she was meant to share her life. "I'm still resting here," she said softly, "and I still need you every day." As the sun set over the Dakota prairie, painting the land in the same golden hues that had welcomed her a decade earlier, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, however difficult their beginning, led precisely where one was meant to be.